1834, Point Coupee Parish, Louisiana. No official record mentions the sisters by name. The church kept their baptism certificates sealed. The courthouse ledger lists their father's plantation under a false proprietor. What remains are fragments, a physician's notebook, a nursemaid's recollection, and a single child's grave without a surname. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. The Duval estate lay on a flat bend of the Mississippi, where cypress roots pushed through soft earth and the river's breath kept everything damp. The main house, built in 1811, stood on stilts over the marsh like a patient thing watching its own decay. By 1834, only 2 Duvals remained, Clemence and Adele, twin daughters whose likeness unsettled even the servants. They moved through the halls barefoot, whispering to each other in a language no one else spoke. The overseer noted that neither would speak to him directly. They communicated by leaving letters folded into the grain sacks or pinned to the backs of the house slaves' aprons. Each bore the same looping handwriting, the same scent of lavender and bloodroot. Sometime in early spring, a new field hand arrived. A man named Josiah, described in plantation papers as half blood, unbroke, and capable. He was taller than most, with pale gray eyes that never lifted unless commanded. Within weeks, rumors spread through the quarters that Josiah was being called to the main house at odd hours, sometimes by Clemence, sometimes by Adele, and sometimes by both. The cook, old Marnie, said she once saw Josiah standing in the upstairs gallery with both sisters behind him, each resting a hand on his shoulder as if posing for a portrait. But no portrait was ever found. By midsummer, the household doctor, Dr. Beauregard Lenoir, was summoned under urgent pretense. His surviving letters mention a crisis of the womb and complications of lineage. He does not name which sister was afflicted, only that the matter concerns the sanctity of the family bloodline. Neighbors recalled seeing Lenoir's buggy arrive after midnight, its wheels muffled with cloth. The next morning, smoke rose from the back of the house, and the kitchen staff said they burned linens until dusk. For 3 weeks, no one saw Josiah. Then he was spotted at the riverbank, his wrists bandaged, staring into the water like it was speaking to him. The sisters reappeared together a month later, wearing identical mourning gowns. Neither attended Mass. The parish priest was told to pray for a lost child. Though none had been baptized or buried, still a small mound appeared behind the magnolia trees near the garden wall, unmarked but freshly tended. One of the house girls whispered that she'd heard a baby crying in the attic long after. Another swore the sound came from beneath the floorboards, but when Lenoir returned that autumn, he wrote, "The house is quiet now. The twins have taken ill with the same fever, and yet neither one sweats." He ends the entry with a line that would later trouble every historian who read it. They speak of the child as if it still lives. One calls it hers, the other says it will never die. 1835, Point Coupee Parish, Louisiana. By the turn of the new year, the Duval plantation had grown unnaturally silent. The laughter that once drifted from the servants' quarters at night was gone. Even the dogs kept close to the porch, as though afraid of the yard beyond. Dr. Lenoir's ledger from February 1008, 135, mentions repeated visits. Both young ladies remain confined to the upper rooms, appetite poor, skin cool, eyes lucid but unfocused. Each asks separately if the other still bleeds. The physician noted that Clemence appeared older by months, though the twins were born within minutes of each other. Her face had grown sharp. Her hair, though brushed daily, thinned at the temples. Adele, by contrast, grew pale and wide-eyed, as if light hurt her. Both refused laudanum. The servants spoke of nightly quarrels, faint cries through the walls. Someone heard furniture being dragged above the ceiling. One of the younger maids, a girl named Eliza, claimed she found small scraps of linen buried beneath the sister's bed, each marked with dried milk and blackened flecks that looked like teeth. When questioned, Clemens smiled and said softly, "Infants shed what they don't need." Josiah had returned to fieldwork by then, though he was never the same. He no longer sang while cutting cane. He slept in the stables instead of the quarters, and refused food from anyone but Marnie. The overseer caught him one evening standing knee deep in the pond, whispering into the water as if soothing a restless child. When confronted, Josiah said, "It's hers. She ain't done feeding it yet." That summer, a traveling priest was called from St. Francisville to bless the house, the official reason, miasma, perhaps, or female melancholy, but the real motive became clear when he entered the upper room. His journal, preserved in the Diocesan archive, describes the scene. Twin sisters, bound by fever and mirrored sin. They speak as one and dream as two. Their chamber reeks of something not yet born, nor fully gone. He performed the cleansing rites, sprinkling holy water along the bed frames and window sills. Clemens retched at the touch of it. Adele giggled and asked if it would make the baby quiet. By autumn, the sickness spread through the household. 2 servants died of unknown fever, their bodies swollen, their tongues blackened. Dr. Lenoir blamed poor sanitation. But the surviving nursemaid, old Marnie, told a different story in her later deposition. It started in that room, air thick as syrup, the smell of iron and milk. The twins said it was only the child learning to breathe. In November 1835, Josiah vanished. Some claimed he ran off toward Baton Rouge. Others said he drowned himself in the river. Yet his name remained in the Plantation ledger, written faintly in a different hand, as if someone wanted to remember, but not to confess. The last note from that year in Lenoir's diary reads, "I have separated them, one to the attic, one to the nursery. They no longer know which is which. The cries come from both rooms now. And no further record exists for that winter." The next surviving entry appears 6 months later, underlined twice. May 1836, the walls are weeping again. December 1836, Point Coupee Parish, Louisiana, by May 1836. The Duval estate was nearly deserted. Half the enslaved workers had been sold or transferred upriver. The gardens grew wild, the cane fields withered under heat and neglect. Only 3 servants remained in the main house, Marnie, the mute boy Samuel, and a woman named Henriette, who slept with rosary beads clenched in her fist. Dr. Lenoir's journal from that season opens with the line, "The sickness has chosen its home." He wrote of strange fluids seeping through the plaster near the nursery, clear at first, then pink, then darkening to a rust hue that smelled faintly sweet. The servants said the walls pulsed as if breathing. When scraped, the residue reappeared by dawn. Clemens occupied the attic then, pale and thin, her wrists wrapped in linen. She refused food, but drank heavily from a jar of thickened milk she kept beside her bed. Adele stayed below in the nursery. She had taken to rocking an empty cradle for hours, crooning lullabies in that secret tongue the twins had shared since childhood. Lenoir described his visits as performative, noting that neither sister responded to touch or temperature. When he pressed a candle near their skin, they did not flinch. Their pulses matched precisely, 60 beats a minute, steady, synchronized. He grew convinced they shared more than blood. One evening, while examining Adele, he heard the same heartbeat twice, once beneath her ribs and faintly again behind the wall. When he moved his ear toward the plaster, it grew louder. The following night, Samuel awoke screaming that something crawled between the floors. Henriette found streaks of blood running along the boards, but no wound on the boy. In the morning, the cradle was gone. Only drag marks led toward the stairs. A letter from Marnie, written to her daughter in New Orleans but never sent, was discovered a century later in the foundation of the house. The child that never was is walking. I hear it moving at night. It ain't got weight, but it leaves wet prints. Miss Clements says it's the air remembering. Miss Adele says it's hungry again. In September 1836, the parish authorities finally intervened. The priest from the year before returned with 2 men to assess the property. His account, recorded in the diocesan log, is brief but chilling. No livestock, no laughter, the windows sealed with wax. The elder twin Clemence confined to the attic, her eyes blackened, her speech incoherent. The younger Adele claims she nursed the infant from her own veins. A vessel of blood discovered beneath the floorboards, contents congealed yet still warm. Lenoir refused to release the sisters to the church's care, insisting it was a medical matter, not a moral one. He forbade further visitation and dismissed the remaining servants. By winter, only he and the twins remained in that rotting house on the river bend. His final entry that year reads like confession. The essence of heredity has rotted here. The child's heartbeat persists in the walls, though its lungs were never formed. The twins lie in separate rooms, yet dream the same dream. When one wakes, the other smiles. Below that, he drew a small diagram, 2 interlocking circles, and between them a single red dot labeled Origin. 1837 Point Coupee Parish, Louisiana. When the thaw came in February 1837, the Mississippi rose high enough to swallow the Duval orchard. Neighbors later said the river came early that year because the ground could not bear what lay beneath. No census lists the sisters alive after that spring, but the correspondence of Dr. Beauregard Lenoir continues through the summer, his handwriting more erratic, his tone shifting from documentation to plea. The structure hums at night, the plaster bulges, the air thickens, something circulates through the house that is not wind. It is them, it is it returning. He wrote that he could hear breathing inside the walls, though the sisters were silent. Both lay in separate rooms now, one above the other. Each called out the other's name in her sleep, sometimes answering herself. Their conditions had reversed. Clemence, once frail, had regained color. Adele, once radiant, had grown gray and speechless. On April 9th, Lenoir recorded finding a faint pulse in the corner of the attic wall, rhythmic, measurable. He placed a stethoscope against it, 60 beats per minute. He wrote, identical to the human heart, yet no body within. 2 weeks later, Henriette, the last surviving servant, was found drowned in the cistern, her rosary beads clutched so tightly they had cut into her palms. The house fell utterly quiet after that. Letters dated June 1837 show Lenoir's growing obsession. I have taken samples from both. Their blood is indistinguishable under lens, same clotting time, same scent of iron. When separated, it congeals faster, as if seeking reunion. He began conducting experiments in the cellar, testing the theory that the child's essence had passed between them. He claimed that when one twin bled, the other fainted. When one slept, the other's pupils dilated. The attic ceiling began to sag. Lenoir noted it as moisture damage, though he admitted it dripped warm rather than cold. The fluid, when collected, separated into 2 layers, clear above, red beneath, and pulsed faintly when touched. In August, a traveling merchant stopped at the plantation seeking trade. His account, preserved decades later in a regional newspaper, described a rotting manor humming like a beehive. He saw a man, presumably Lenoir, stumbling barefoot through the yard with his shirt soaked in blood, muttering about reclamation. That was the last verified sighting. The next document, unsigned but in Lenoir's hand, was dated September 1837, and found folded inside a sealed ledger in the ruins. It has chosen. Clemence sleeps. Adele breathes for her. The child is not a child, but a rhythm, one born of both and neither. I hear it behind me now, moving along the grain of the wood. When I breathe, it pauses. When I stop, it continues. No one entered the Duval estate again until after the flood of 1841, when a surveyor reported the house half submerged, its upper floors collapsed. In his notes, he described a cradle floating upright among the debris, and on its side, scratched faintly into the wood, "We are not two." He left the property that same day. The land was never resettled. Years later, parish workers digging near the old foundation unearthed two sets of small bones interlaced at the ribs, as though fused. The skulls were identical. Between them, buried in the same soil, was a third, infant-sized, unfinished. Part 5, The Silence Beneath the Flood, by 1841, Point Coupee Parish had become a ghostland of broken estates. The flood that year swallowed half the parish, and with it, most memory of the Duval sisters. The locals spoke of that plantation only in whispers, calling it La Maison des Battements, the House of Heartbeats. Those who lived near the ruins claimed that when the river rose high enough to touch the foundation, they could hear a faint, synchronized thumping beneath the water, like a drum muffled by soil. No one went near after dark. Even the fishermen avoided casting nets in that bend of the river, saying that the water there pulls back. The Duval property was eventually marked for reclamation by the state, and in 1845, a team of convicts was sent to clear the overgrowth. Their supervisor, Captain Julian Marchand, kept a daily log. The entries began ordinary, notes about progress, weather, and the laborers' behavior. But by the third week, the handwriting grew frantic. The men refuse to dig where the foundation once stood. They say the earth trembles there, as if something is shifting underneath. I ordered them to continue. They broke into a hollow cavity, smooth walls, almost as if carved. The smell was like copper and milk. Inside the cavity, they found remnants of a cradle and what March and described as the upper frame of a stairwell descending into water. He sealed it immediately and marked the site off limits. That night, one prisoner escaped. His body was later found face down in the swamp, his chest split open as if something had burst outward. Marchand's final entry read, "They are still here. I can hear the rhythm even when I close my ears. The river hums with it. There are no frogs in this water anymore, no sound but the heartbeat." He vanished 2 nights later. The project was abandoned. The land was never reclaimed. For decades, the plantation site lay forgotten beneath sediment and wild cane. Then, in 1892, a group of archaeologists from Chilean University rediscovered the property while conducting surveys on antebellum ruins. Among the fragments of foundation and rusted medical tools, they found something that defied documentation: 2 small coffins nailed together along the length of their sides. The coffins were empty. Inside the hollow space between them, wrapped in decayed muslin, was a single object, a rosary fused to a vertebra by what appeared to be old coagulated blood. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Elena Ray, later wrote in her personal notes, unpublished but recovered from her estate, "The house was gone, but the pulse was not. We stood at the edge of the old foundation, and the ground beneath our boots seemed to breathe. The men refused to stay after sundown. I did not blame them. The soil there feels aware. After 1892, the Duval plantation was erased from maps entirely. No record shows it being sold or studied again. Locals say that when storms roll in from the Gulf, the thunder never reaches that patch of land. It only echoes, slow, deliberate, and rhythmic, like something remembering itself. They say if you stand near that flooded field on a still night, you can hear it, the faint, steady heartbeat that never stopped after 1837. And if you listen long enough, another sound joins it, a lullaby sung in 2 voices, The Anatomy of Inheritance. By 1903, the state of Louisiana had forgotten the Duval name. Their parish birth records had been lost in the courthouse fire of 1866, their lineage erased by design or neglect. Only one man seemed determined to uncover it again, Dr. Henry Alcott, a physician and amateur historian from Baton Rouge. Alcott's obsession began innocently. He had inherited a collection of 19th century medical texts from his uncle, a surgeon who'd practiced near Oplauses. Among them was a ledger bound in oil-stained leather. Its spine bore no title, only an embossed monogram, M.D. Inside, the handwriting was meticulous, clinical, and deeply unsettling. It documented dozens of observations labeled Subject C, Subject M, and Subject E. The entries detailed gestation lengths, bone density, pigmentation patterns, and unusual cranial morphology in offspring of the D-line. At first, Alcott assumed it was a medical treatise, perhaps related to early obstetric research. But the final page froze him. Beneath the notation, experiment concluded, 1837 was a sketch, 3 women, their faces blurred in graphite, and beside them, a man whose eyes were left entirely blank. At the bottom of the page, written faintly in pencil, clear water shall return to blood, and the D line will not end until the water does. Curious, Alcott began tracing the initials, cross, referencing them with antebellum physicians. The only plausible match he found was Dr. Marcel Duval, whose license had been revoked in 1836 for unethical anatomical inquiry. Every search led him back to the same parish, the same floodplain where the Duval plantation once stood. In the spring of 1904, Alcott traveled there himself. Locals warned him not to camp near the old foundations. You'll hear it. One fisherman said, refusing to meet his eye, that sound that ain't thunder, you think it's your heart, but it's not. He stayed anyway. Alcott's field journal, recovered later from his boarding trunk, describes his first 3 nights with a detached precision that gradually unraveled into horror. April 6, 1904. The ruins are still visible, charred brick outlines, scattered nails, a portion of the well intact. Found fragments of porcelain. The ground is oddly warm, as though the river itself exhales here. I hear a rhythmic vibration at dusk. My pulse matches it against my will. April 7. There's something beneath the soil. The cane roots curve downward unnaturally, as if reaching toward a void. Dug several inches and found pieces of what may be human bone, infantile by scale. April 8. It is clearer now, 2 distinct rhythms, the smaller one faint, the larger impossibly steady. I dreamt of 3 women watching me through the reeds, their mouths moving in perfect unison. They asked, "Do you keep what is born, or do you bury it?" I woke with mud in my teeth. When the search party found Alcott's camp 4 days later, his tent was undisturbed. His instruments and notes were neatly packed. There was no sign of a struggle. Only the ground where his cot had stood was different, lightly sunken, damp, and pulsing as though it still drew breath. The sheriff's report concluded accidental drowning during river rise. Though the nearest waterline was nearly half a mile away, the journal was sealed with his estate papers and his death quietly forgotten. But among the university's anthropology archives today, a faded envelope remains, postmarked Point Coupee, 1904. Inside, a single vertebra and a slip of paper that reads, in Alcott's handwriting, "The blood remembers what the mind denies. The blood remembers." By the 1930s, Louisiana had modernized on paper, rail lines stitched through sugar country, cotton fields replaced by refineries, and the past rewritten as folklore for tourists. Yet in the small town of Ville Platte, whispers still traveled faster than trains. That year, a young nurse named Clara Mountain began her internship at St. Augustine Parish Hospital. She was quiet, diligent, and regarded as something of a miracle herself. born premature, yet with skin so pale it nearly glowed under the gas lamp. The older midwives said she was blessed by the White River, though no one could recall exactly what they meant. One evening, while cataloging patient records in the hospital's storage basement, Clara discovered a locked wooden chest stamped M.D. 1837. She assumed it belonged to some long-retired doctor. Inside were glass jars sealed with wax, each containing yellowed slips of paper floating in murky fluid. When she held one up to the light, the ink bled into shape. Subject E, 5th generation pigmentation reduced, cranial ratio stabilized. Clara frowned. 5th generation, she whispered. The next jar contained something worse. A sliver of vertebra tagged in faded handwriting, specimen from Alcott exhumation site 1904. That night, Clara dreamt she was standing knee-deep in a flooded cane field. The moon hung unnaturally low, and from beneath the water, pale hands reached upward, clutching at her skirt. Voices spoke beneath the current, whispering her name in triplicate. Clara, Clara, Clara. When she woke, her bedsheets were damp and streaked with mud. Over the following weeks, strange symptoms began. Her veins darkened like ink beneath her skin. In sunlight, her pupils narrowed to thin vertical slits. She fainted twice at work, each time claiming she heard breathing beneath the floorboards. The hospital director, Dr. Lucian Hargrove, arranged for her to take rest at the staff quarters, but curiosity overpowered fear. Clara returned to the basement one final time, determined to burn whatever haunted her. Instead, she found a folder she'd missed before, apped in linen, marked the D-line, ongoing anomaly. Inside were photographs. The first was of 2 identical women in hoop dresses, one wearing a locket shaped like a serpent, the other with a visible scar beneath her eye. Written beneath, Mara and Delphine Duval, 1008, 133. The next image chilled her to the bone. A newborn, swaddled, its eyes completely black. The caption reads simply, Clara D., 5th cycle confirmed. Clara stumbled backward, her breath caught between disbelief and dread. 5th generation, her name, her face. She ran to Dr. Hargrove's office, thrusting the folder onto his desk. But when he saw the photographs, he didn't look surprised, only solemn. Miss Mountain, he said quietly, "Did your grandmother ever tell you where she was born?" She said near the river. Clara replied, trembling, "The Clearwater Creek." Hargrove sighed, tapping one finger against the folder. "That creek hasn't existed in a century. It was diverted after the levee collapse in 1837. She stared at him. "Then, how?" He leaned forward, voice low. "The blood doesn't need a place. It remembers, it waits." Later that night, Clara vanished from her quarters. The hospital's night nurse reported hearing humming from the direction of the storage cellar, an old lullaby no one recognized, repeating in harmony. When they forced the door open at dawn, the chest was gone. Only a damp trail led toward the rear exit, ending in the tall reeds behind the hospital. The air smelled faintly of iron. That same week, Clearwater Creek, dry for nearly 100 years, began to run again. The current was pale red, like rust stirred from the bottom, and from the reeds witnesses claimed they saw 3 figures watching the water, all women, all identical, all humming. The D-line revival. By 1961, Louisiana was changing again. The bayous that once concealed plantations were now dissected by highways, the old bloodlines buried beneath concrete and flood control. Yet, as ever, the Duval history refused to rot. It merely changed its mask. The new mask came in the form of Project Deep Lineage, an unpublicized genetics study conducted out of Chilean Medical College. Officially, it was a federally funded attempt to trace hereditary disorders among mixed-race families in the Gulf region. In truth, it was an inheritance study, searching for a series of unusual hematological traits that had appeared in rural parishes for over a century. The lead investigator was Dr. William Renard, a young biochemist trained in Europe. His private journal, later recovered by a student who found it hidden behind a laboratory panel, offers the first recorded connection between his study and the Duval family. Subject CL7 exhibits an extraordinary reaction under hemoglobin stress tests. Iron uptake rate quadruple baseline, serum coagulation delayed indefinitely. I have never seen blood refuse to clot. It shivers. At first, Renard assumed a lab error. But as more subjects were tested, a pattern emerged. Each bore a faint silver birthmark over the chest, near the heart. Some called it a mark of twins, others a burn. None of the participants were biologically related, or so it seemed. Then came the name on file #13, Clara Lou Mountain, missing since 1932, now allegedly the grandmother of one of the subjects. The handwriting on her baptism record matched that of the nurse's notes from St. Augustine Hospital. Renard grew obsessed. He began visiting old records offices, tracing genealogies through burnt courthouse ledgers and forgotten church books. His notes became more desperate. The pattern never breaks. It moves in pairs, always two born of one. When one dies, the other disappears. Every 28 years, the bloodline surfaces again, each time nearer to the city. One night, the janitor reported finding Renard asleep at his desk, his arms covered in shallow incisions. Each cut had been sealed not by scabbing, but by a faint white membrane, thin as tissue paper. The next morning, Renard called an emergency staff meeting. He claimed he'd found the molecular signature of persistence. His colleagues laughed it off. 2 days later, he locked himself in the containment lab and drew a full vial of his own blood. The tape from the observation camera still survives, though it's kept sealed in the university archives. Witnesses describe the footage as unexplainable. The blood in the centrifuge never separated. It rose, it pulsed. When the door was finally forced open, Renard was gone. His lab coat lay folded beside the machine, and the vial was missing. On the wall, written in the same pale red substance, was a single line. It breathes through us still. After that, Project Deep Lineage was quietly terminated. The research material, blood samples, field notes, and microfilm was transferred to a private foundation in Baton Rouge. But rumors persisted that one of Renard's assistants smuggled a sample out before the shutdown. That same year, reports surfaced of 2 sisters found wandering near Bayou Sara, identical, expressionless, unable to speak. Their blood tests were inconclusive, their fingerprints identical, and both bore the same faint mark over the heart. They were committed to a state hospital under false names. One died 3 months later. The other was released to unknown guardians. Local nurses still refer to them as the Mountain Twins. The resurrection study in 1978, a flood damaged a section of the Baton Rouge genetic archives, exposing forgotten records of Project Deep Lineage. Among the boxes was a mislabeled film reel marked simply continuance/D line/field #01. The footage, grainy, unsteady, silent, showed 2 women strapped to parallel hospital beds. Each was breathing rapidly, their veins visible beneath translucent skin. Electrodes ran from their chests to a single machine pulsing with a rhythmic red light. A handwritten note spliced into the reel read, "Cycle VI viability confirmed." What began as a research continuation was later revealed to be an attempt at genetic resurrection. Renard's missing blood vial had been retrieved from the 1961 lab. In 1977, his successors, under the direction of a doctor, Calhoun Lamar, had mixed it with preserved samples traced to the Duval bloodline. The result, when embryos, gestated artificially and delivered within 6 months. The internal report, later recovered by a whistleblower, described the outcome: Subjects display no cognitive response but exhibit synchronized cardiac resonance at 3, 4 Hz. Each breath taken by one induces identical thoracic motion in the other, vital functions sustained through an unknown feedback mechanism. They are not identical twins. They are one organism distributed between two bodies. It was called the Resurrection Study. At first, Dr. Lamar wrote with excitement, convinced he had reawakened a dormant genetic sequence. His tone shifted quickly. By the second week, he noted that both subjects hummed in their sleep low, tuneless vibrations that caused glass to tremble. On the fifth night, a nurse entered the isolation ward to find one bed empty and the other soaked through with fluid that shimmered faintly under light. When she leaned closer, she swore she heard heartbeats coming from the fluid. 2 at first, then 1. The missing body was found the next morning, folded neatly behind the radiator as though placed there. There were no wounds, no sign of struggle, only the faint smell of wet iron. After that, the study collapsed. The participants vanished, the documentation sealed, and the surviving infant, if it could be called that, was placed in private custody under federal supervision. Dr. Lamar disappeared in 1979. His last written words were scrawled in the margin of his research log. It isn't bloodline, it's continuum. The river remembers its course. Even when dammed, it finds another mouth. Decades later, urban explorers discovered remnants of the Baton Rouge facility beneath a condemned hospital wing. Inside, walls were marked by reddish stains resembling handprints, and in the center room, an overturned hospital bed lay beside a child's rattle fused into the floor. Audio recovered from one of the film canisters contains a brief fragment of voice, distorted but clear enough to transcribe. "We never stopped breathing. You just forgot to listen." The researcher who uncovered it, Mara Johnston, uploaded her findings online in 2013. Within hours, the footage was removed and her account deleted. Her family later reported strange disturbances in their home, watermarks spreading across ceilings in perfect symmetrical patterns, always two rings overlapping like lungs. Neighbors said they heard lullabies through the walls. After a month, the house was found abandoned. The police described a film of condensation coating every surface, and in the bathtub, filled halfway with clear water, lay two impressions as if bodies had recently been submerged side by side. The water was warm, no fingerprints, no signs of entry, only a pulse, heard faintly beneath the tiles like something alive below the foundation, the river that still breathes. They paved over the Baton Rouge facility in 1983, built a parking structure, and placed a small memorial plaque for medical progress and service to humanity. But beneath the asphalt, the foundation remains. The workers who laid the concrete said the ground was never dry, always sweating, always warm. One foreman quit after his boots sank into what he called living mud. He told his crew it felt like a lung. For 40 years, no one spoke the name Duval. It faded from public record, erased from archives, folded into folklore. But blood doesn't care about bureaucracy. It moves like water, quietly, patiently, until it finds a way back to light. In 2020, a research assistant named Elias Granger began digitizing forgotten medical files during the pandemic closure at Chilean's archives. One mislabeled folder, its ink nearly vanished, was marked C. L. Mountain/Hematology Study, 1931. Inside, Elias found brittle test results and a lock of pale hair sealed in glassine paper. The sample shouldn't have survived 90 years, but the hair looked freshly cut. When he handled the vial, condensation formed instantly on its surface. He recorded in his notes, "Strange static under my fingertips, felt like pulse, can't explain." Over the next week, his lab equipment began malfunctioning. Heart rate monitors triggered themselves in empty rooms. Refrigerators ran hot. Every night, Elias heard a slow thump from the archive basement. Steady, patient. He thought it was a leaking pipe until he realized it matched his own heartbeat exactly. On the seventh night, he returned with a flashlight and recorder. The logs recovered from his office detail his descent. 11:42 p.m. entering lower vault. Temperature rising, walls sweating. 11:46 p.m. heartbeat louder now, not mine, two rhythms overlapping. 11:49 p.m. smell of river water. Metallic. 11:51 p.m. seeing light under old storage door, moving like breath. The recording ends with a faint lullaby, two voices, one slightly higher, weaving through static, then silence. Campus security found the vault door open the next morning. Elias was gone. His flashlight floated in a shallow pool that hadn't existed before. On the wall someone, or something, had written with damp fingers, "We are whole again." That same month, reports emerged of strange flooding across southern Louisiana. Not heavy storms, just isolated overflows where no rain had fallen. Each flood site shared the same signature, twin water rings in perfect symmetry, the soil beneath warm to the touch. Locals now call it the breathing ground. They say when you stand there at night, the earth feels alive beneath your feet, lowly pulsing like a heart too large to die. Some swear they've seen two women standing in the shallows, holding hands. Both pale as wax, both humming softly, and if you listen long enough, their faces become familiar, not because you've seen them, but because something in your blood seems to remember. The story ends here, but the current does not. If you ever visit Point Coupee Parish, avoid the low fields when the river rises. Don't answer if you hear singing across the water, and above all, never follow the sound of your own heartbeat into the dark. Because down there, beneath the mud and the riverbed, the Duval bloodline still stirs, and when the earth breathes again, it will call you by name.